What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. So recently in the wide world of college football, there's been a lot of heated debate about NIL and if it's great for college football because of all the power that it's giving the players, or if it's really destroying college football and ruining the sport as a whole. So I figured I would make a video breaking down all of the aspects of it. Starting off with, I will go over the good parts of NIL, I will then transition to going over the bad parts of NIL, and then I will conclude, give my final thoughts and final verdict on it, where I stand with NIL, and the impact I feel like it is currently having and may have in the future of college football. So let's go ahead and start off with the good aspects of NIL. And I think the first and biggest of the good aspects is that it finally compensates the players who have been making literally billions of dollars for these universities over the years. They finally get a fair chance at compensation, and I know that they get scholarships and athletic training, and they get housing, and they get, food stipends. They get a lot of things. I'm not saying that they don't get anything, because they certainly do. They get quite a lot. But in comparison to the amount of money that they generate for these universities, it's really not much. It's really not much. And I think that a lot of it also is, so these players weren't even allowed to make money on their own outside of the university. I mean, Destroying's a huge YouTuber now who had to quit his football career because he had a YouTube channel that made money while also playing football. And the NCAA basically said you can't do that because you're making money off your name, image, and likeness. Every other college student can make money off of their name, image, and likeness. It was really an unfair system. You're punishing players just because they play a sport. Super unfair. Really good that they finally can get compensation out of it and all the benefits that come with compensation. I think that is the biggest of the good things. Another good thing that NIL does is that it can help some of the smaller schools who are more uniquely positioned to exploit NIL. What I mean by uniquely positioned is that a school like South Florida, who was a pretty small school, they're an FBS school, so it's not like they're an FCS school or anything, but they're a group of 5 school, relatively small. They have the number 1 class in the transfer portal, last I checked, most of it being because they're located near Tampa. There's a lot of NIL opportunities there, especially for more of a mid-level to low-level program that makes them really, really good and really enticing for players that are looking to go to that level of a program. And that really helps them out a lot. And also, if you look at like a Jackson State, who just picked up Travis Hunter, a lot of that is due to the connections that Deion Sanders has and the connections that you can really gain at a school like Jackson State as far as HBCUs go, where Travis Hunter will likely make at least $1 million. I've seen reports of $1.5 million he'll make in NIL deals just from signing with Jackson State. And so that can really help a smaller school like that start to get some bigger recruits and help sort of balance the playing field a little bit. But it only helps for certain schools who are very uniquely positioned, with Jackson State having a guy like a Deion, South Florida being located in the Tampa area, things like that. It'll help some of those schools build up, which is good to see. It also lets players start to build on their brands a lot earlier than they used to be able to, and gives them some unique career moves and opportunities they have. For example, like Tom Brady just had an NIL deal that he signed with a few players, including like Cade McNamara, George Pickens, a few others. And that's a really interesting and unique opportunity for them to get to interact with a guy like Tom Brady, who's the greatest football player of all time. You build connections that way. You get to start to build your brand a little bit, which is really important for a lot of these guys that are going to go to the next level. That's become a huge part of being a professional athlete, just building an off-the-field brand. This really gives them an opportunity to do that earlier on, whereas used to it was kind of difficult to build a brand because you couldn't make any money off of it. And so now with them being able to do that, that certainly helps them out a lot, and I think that's really interesting and really good to provide, especially to the more, like top-end players who really can get a good brand going behind them. I think it's really good that NIL provides that for them. Also, more of a niche thing that it could do, but it can help protect some players who get injured in college and they lose a chance at a lot of money that they were going to make in the NFL. They're already making NIL money. That helps to offset that to some extent. Obviously, it doesn't completely replace the money that they lost by not being able to go to the NFL anymore, but it does offset that, and it makes it a little bit more worthwhile for the college athletes and gives them a little bit more of a concrete reward for sacrificing their body the way that they do every Saturday for our entertainment. So it's good to see that it gives them some level of protection there. Not a lot, and it's only going to come up in certain situations, but it's better than what we did have, and so I think that's really good to see from NIL as well. Also, it does help some players who have pretty unique family situations where they're in a really poor family, or their family lives in a dangerous area, and they need to help them get out as soon as possible. Used to, you have to wait your 3 years in college, then go to the NFL, then make your money. And for some kids, that's just honestly too long to really help their families when they need it. And so this does help them to some extent, although you have to really be one of the top NIL earners to do that. And I don't think it's fair to put that responsibility on the shoulders of a student athlete, somebody who's just 18, 19 years old. But unfairly or not, that is a real situation that a lot of these kids find themselves in. And giving them an avenue to help support their family even sooner, I think is really cool. I think it's really helpful, and I think it can be really beneficial for a lot of those student athletes, a lot of those kids going forward. Now, moving on to some of the bad things that come with NIL, I think one of them that I've seen out there and that I don't entirely agree with, but it can definitely come up, is that it does pay these athletes, which is a good thing for all the reasons I just mentioned, but also some of these kids are immature. I mean, a lot of them are immature. They're 18, 19, 20 years old, and a lot of them sign multi-million-dollar contracts and deals, and they're not really mature enough or old enough to know how to manage that money. And, there's always the saying, more money, more problems. That can cause real issues for them. You can run into problems with them getting set up in scams, or them getting used for their money, and they're not mature enough and old enough to know how to handle those situations and know how to manage their money so they don't just waste it all really early on. But that's always been a problem even in the NFL when people are older going into the league, so that's been a problem there and continues to be a problem there. It's just, to me, putting that potential issue even earlier on into a person's life is really a potential big detriment there. But that's all up to the person. Some people are going to be able to handle that a lot better than others. I don't feel like that's a major detraction as a whole, because it varies so much case by case. But it is something to keep in mind when you look at this NIL stuff. It's not always a great thing for these 18-year-olds to be making multiple millions of dollars or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's a lot of money, especially at that age, and it can really lead to some other distractions off the field that can be more detrimental to them than the money would have been beneficial, and so that's something to consider for sure, in my opinion. Somewhat similarly, it really opens the door for a lot of these athletes to get used and exploited by companies, and not just by companies, but by other groups, other family members, friends, things like that. Once you get money when they're very young like that, it's hard to properly control and manage that money. But particularly in this region, it's focused more on the company side of it, where they can sign pretty shady contracts sometimes that sometimes you may not know exactly what you're signing up for. You may think you're getting all of these good things out of it, and there could be a lot of hidden things in there where they garnish some of your money. They may have exclusivity deals with them. Other things like that can really exploit some athletes who don't do their due diligence necessarily in looking into these. And also for a lot of these people, I mean, you're talking with companies that seem very official. They seem very legit. You're brand new to this whole thing, and they're throwing around a lot of money. It's hard not to get excited, get in over your head real quick. And that can lead to some pretty major negative side effects down the line if you get caught up in some of these shady contracts, and maybe even with some of them some legal trouble potentially. But I think that's definitely another downside that comes with NIL. Another one that is also, again, kind of a smaller downside is that some athletes may take an opportunity that will pay them really good in college, but it could compromise their ability to make more money in the NFL, where the real big money is to be made. So, for example, you may go to a school because of all of the NIL things that they offer you, but the school's really not good for you as far as developing you as a player, giving you all the proper facilities you may need, getting you exposure and things like that. it's not as big of a deal in today's world as it used to be, with how easy it is to get on TV, how easy it is to get your film out there. But it is a very real thing that some players, especially on the more mid-level, could run into, where they take a bigger payday and it puts them in a worse situation long-term for a more short-term immediate payoff. Could definitely be a downside to watch for there. And now we get to what I think is by far the biggest of the downsides, and that is the massive tampering implications for high school recruiting and for recruiting in the transfer portal that come with this. Because it's really, really hard to say that people aren't going to be recruiting now by saying things like, hey, you want to play offensive line at Texas, you get $50,000. Texas A&M isn't giving you that. Or, just lots of tampering with things like that, offering people contracts essentially that technically the school can't offer, but really they're offering them that. It's just a formality that they're not technically offering them that money. So you run into that. You run into it a lot in the portal as well, where you talk to a guy who may or may not end up in the portal, and it's that question of, what are you getting in NIL over there? Oh, you're only getting this. Well, we can double that for you over here. We can hook you up better than they're hooking you up. You run into things like that. It's horrible for the sport. It's horrible for recruiting, and I think there's a lot of negative things that can come out of that. A lot of negative things that can come out of tampering in the portal, high school recruiting. It can really shift the balance of power in recruiting even more in favor of the bigger schools. It can lead to a lot of shady interactions, and I feel like in the end, it can really hurt the player and the student athlete here, who's just kind of a pawn in a bigger scheme in that sense. I think that's a major issue, one of the, if not the biggest issue that came out with the NIL stuff. Similar to that, it opens the door for just buying players, essentially, where, like I was saying, when you're recruiting, you're offering them, well, you can make this much money here versus you'd only make that much money there, and even in high school, in the portal. And you run into a thing then where it's like, who has the deepest pockets to pay their players? Who has the best connections to get their players hooked up with bigger companies, bigger celebrities? And it's a really slippery slope of just running into full-on, paying athletes without like a salary cap, without base rules like the NFL has. It's really dangerous when you go down that road. It does not help the small schools at all, like people said NIL would. It really hurts the small schools because the people in the programs who are going to be able to offer the most money are the biggest and most wealthy programs out there, and they're the ones who are going to be able to capitalize off things like that. And I just don't think that buying players and that being one of, if not the biggest contributor in recruiting, is good for the sport of college football. I don't think it's what college football should be about, and I feel like NIL can really, really help push it in that direction, and I don't think that's good. Similar and sort of building off of that, it's not an even playing field across the nation right now. There is not good legislation nationwide on what is and isn't allowed to be offered. It varies conference to conference. It varies state to state. It gives some schools massive advantages over other schools in the NIL department. It really hamstrings some schools, and it just puts you at a completely uneven playing field, even more than a normal college football playing field would be, where it's already uneven just due to, some schools are just bigger and have more assets and more resources to work with, but it takes that and it amplifies it even more, puts it on an even higher degree, and when there's not even fair rules across the board for people to follow, you run into just total mayhem, honestly, in a lot of situations. It turns into a mess. There's a lot of downsides that come with there not even being an even set of rules across the nation for people to follow. And then, like I said, it does hurt the smaller schools a lot more than it will help them. For every South Florida or Jackson State that gets to benefit from it, there will be another 5 small schools who can't compete in recruiting because the other schools that these kids are looking at are going to give them more money and just have way more opportunity for these schools than these smaller schools will have. And who's to blame a player if you have a chance to make $40,000 here but $100,000 there? Why would you not take the $100,000? And it's not exactly as plain and clear as that, but it's really not far off of it. If we're being honest with how this is really going, That's basically what's happening in recruiting right now. And that really, really devastates some of the smaller schools, especially small schools that aren't in big cities, small rural schools in particular. It puts them in a really bad spot. And I think that that's always bad for college football when you're just propping up the elite more and more and more with more legislation and opportunities for the rich and the already powerful programs to just get more and more wealthy, more and more powerful. I don't think it's good for the sport as a whole. And then also, there's just not enough NCAA officials to regulate this on a national scale. Even if you set in stone a framework that was better at regulating this than the current framework we have, which is basically non-existent, there's not enough resources to actually enforce it. They don't have enough people to go check every program, every interaction they make. Yes, they may catch one or two, but it's too late at that point. You've already got every school doing it. It's just a matter of who gets caught at that point. It's not good. There's just not enough unless you're going to massively increase the staffing of the NCAA for this specific thing. You're not going to have enough officials to regulate this. It's going to lead to some real pandemonium, some real mayhem there that just adds on to the already existing issues with NIL, not having a good legal framework. Even if you give it a good legal framework, there's no one there to enforce it. And then also the last point I'm going to make about it is that there are some potential legal troubles down the road due to some poorly regulated contracts because there's not enough officials, because there's not true consistent, precedents across the board for what is and what isn't allowed. You could run into down the road some legal trouble for players, for programs, for conferences even. I don't expect any big program or any big conference or anything to get in severe legal trouble because that's just not how it works. But it could create some real issues, for the smaller schools, for individual student athletes who may get put into a deal that they think is legit, come to find out it's not. Just a lot of potential problems there. Goes hand in hand with it not being well regulated, there not being good rules, and there's just not enough people to enforce rules even if they make them. Overall, though, in conclusion, there are definitely some major benefits of NIL, largely that it fairly compensates student athletes, whereas in the past they weren't allowed to make any money off of their name, image, or likeness. Despite having generous scholarships and assistance from the universities, like I said earlier, it's still not proportionately even remotely close to the amount of money that they're generating for that university. However, I think there are even more downsides, like the potential for players to be exploited by companies and universities, massive tampering in recruiting, unfair practices because there's no precedent across the nation. There's no real framework to follow. It varies so much state to state, conference to conference. It's going to cause severe harm to smaller programs, and I think that's really bad for college football as a whole, despite all the financial benefits it can provide individual athletes and all the good that can come out of that. The potential implications of schools getting into what is essentially a bidding war for high school kids and even college players on other teams, to me, far too detrimental to the health of the sport to justify the benefits of it, in my opinion at least. Also, there's the issue of the cat's kind of out of the bag, so to speak, meaning that now that the NIL is out to this extent, there really isn't a good way to reel it back in, at least not one that I've heard yet. I mean, I've heard some ideas like giving players the option to either take your full scholarship or take your NIL deal offer, but that's completely unrealistic. I don't see any way you could legitimately enforce it or implement it. It's kind of a fantasy land thing. There's no way it's actually going to happen in the real world. Personally, I would have preferred it if players were allowed to make money off their own name, image, and likeness, like a guy like Destroying was doing with his own YouTube channel, but keep the universities and all out of it so they can't organize deals for students and things like that. However, this also has its own downsides because then it opens up the door for student athletes to be exploited even more by companies because the university isn't there to negotiate on their behalf, and it would just become the same thing that it is now, where universities would be orchestrating deals for them behind the scenes, just not actually doing it, and it would just become a formality that doesn't actually do any good. And so, yeah, I don't see a good way to reel NIL back in from where it is now. Overall, though, I do see the benefits of NIL. I understand why people push for it, and it's not at all bad, and I don't think it's going to destroy college football as a whole like some people are saying, but I do feel that the negative implications of NIL are far outweighing the benefits of it. And therefore, if I have to say if it's good or bad, I'm going to say it's bad for now. But that's just my opinion. I'm super interested to hear what all you guys have to say about it in the comment section below. So please go ahead, drop a comment in the comment section down below on your opinion on NIL as a whole in college football across the board. Anything you want to talk about with NIL, I'll be very interested to hear what you guys have to say. Also, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more college football content like this in the future. I will continue to be putting out college football content pretty frequently, and also it really just helps me out, helps the channel grow, and it means a lot. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.